So, hey everyone, my name is Graham Barnes. I'm a product manager with Gnosis. Unfortunately, Friederike couldn't make it today. She fell ill. Today, I'm going to be talking about a regulated prediction market that we'll be launching shortly in winter 2019-2020. I'm going to give an overview into essentially prediction markets because it's a fascinating space and a very broad space as well. How to be regulated, specifically in our case, and at a technical level, like how we did that, and then our product offering called Site. And then a bit of a market creation exercise at the end. So, prediction markets. Been around a while. If any of you saw Guess's presentation yesterday, you'll probably see a couple of these similar slides. This was interesting. The first prediction market that I know that was banned was on who the next pope was going to be. And the punishment for essentially making a prediction backed by value on who the next pope was going to be is you would no longer be a Catholic. That was the punishment. From there, and it gets a bit more of a modern example, so Betfair's political prediction markets are super interesting. And I mean, the Brexit prediction markets are really hot right now and really interesting. But going away from political prediction markets in the betting realm, this has actually been a field of academia for quite some time now. So the University of Iowa, they've been running this prediction market since like the 1980s. And they've produced some really compelling research basically about the accuracy of a prediction market versus, pollsters and pundits on TV pundits. Predicted is also super slick UI, great markets. The catch with both of these two products is that they are limited. They've got a no action letter from the, I believe it's the CTFC, a regulatory body in the United States, and limited somewhat to the amount an individual user can trade, how many markets they can trade, and how many participants can trade in a specific market. But the great thing about that is the research that's come out of it has been fantastic. And then, I mean, during the 90s, we had all sorts of interesting web applications arising. And this was a super interesting one. It's still live somewhat, but it was a prediction market where you could make a prediction on the success of a movie. So like when a movie releases on the weekend, what is the box office going to be? And then they expanded it so you could get, you could basically buy a derivative of your favorite star. And if they acted in a lot of movies and made a lot of money, your shares in that star would make a lot of money. They tried to get regulated and got shut down. It actually seemed quite promising. And then the lobbyists from the movie industry shut it down completely. Because, yeah, they didn't want people they don't want people speculating on the movies per se. They want people speculating perhaps on the stock of the studio. So just looking at this like broad range of prediction markets, weather prediction markets have been around for a while. There's a website that specifically caters to it, the CX Exchange. But then the CME, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, also offers weather futures. There have been studies into like the predictive nature, and according to some studies, they are better predictors of weather than actual forecasts. So taking the CME as an example of a way that people can make predictions on an event happening in the future, they've started offering Bitcoin futures. It was super interesting. They allow anyone that has either a broker or anyone who's got a membership to essentially make a prediction on the price of Bitcoin. And then, who here is familiar with BitMEX? It's awesome. Love BitMEX, a lot of fun. But this is perhaps the most popular crypto derivatives platform out there that allows all sorts of, they actually started where you could do a future on like pretty much anything or any crypto assets, and they've subsequently reduced their range to just the most liquid coins. Principle is you can make a prediction on the price of a crypto asset. So blockchain prediction markets, specifically ones whereby either the market mechanism is decentralized, not necessarily just the underlying asset. So yeah, we've got Augur, which is perhaps the one that's been around the longest, and is the most decentralized. A really fantastic display of technology, incredible stuff. And then we've seen two applications on top of Augur. Veil, which unfortunately sunsetted recently. But the interesting thing about Veil is they looked at Augur and I'm not sure this is how the conversation went, but they were like, damn, we can make this a way better user experience. So they added a ton of features, but notably they offered 2 forms of monetization. The one is instant settlement. So the Augur Oracle, which is decentralized, can take a while to resolve. So Vail was like, well, listen, there's these markets here, you pay a 1% fee, and they will resolve immediately. Essentially, Vail absorbed the risk of the resolution going the wrong way. The other form of monetization, I completely just blanked, but there was another one. And then Guesser. So I believe we have a representative from Guesser. But the UI is fantastic. Out of any dApp that I've used, it's super elegant, super simple. And the great thing about Guesser is they show you all the information that's relevant when making a prediction. So you really start thinking of like, what information do I need when deciding, is Carrie Lam going to be the chief executive officer by Monday? Also running on top of Augur, as I mentioned. And then you've got Helena. So Helena is a project that's built on top of Gnosis's V1 contracts. What's different about Helena is they've tried to bridge some of the UX difficulties. They've got a tournament model, which essentially means you pay a subscription, or, okay, this model probably isn't live, but it's where they're going with it, that members pay a subscription, so like $10 a month, and then they have a pool that is divided amongst the top, however many users, top percentage. But essentially, yeah, a tournament style. Now, this is interesting because these aren't technically prediction markets. These are decentralized derivatives protocols. So MPX built on market protocol, and then Synthetics Exchange built on synthetics. But essentially, it allows someone to make a prediction on the price of a crypto asset. And that's why I've included it here. And really, because between Augur, between the Gnosis contracts, or between the MPX protocol, it's underneath the hood, it actually all works the same way. So if we have a market, for example, will Ethereum 2.0 launch in H1 2020? Yes, no. Very simple market. Essentially, collateral comes in. So a user says, cool, I'm going to bet 1 DAI. The event contract takes that 1 DAI, and then we'll create outcome tokens. In our example, there'll be 2 outcome tokens, yes and no. And then the market contract will allocate those outcome tokens to various participants in the market. So an order book would split it amongst someone who believes yes or no. An automated market maker might just give you the yes token and then hold the no token for themselves. But underneath the hood, this is it. It's that simple, an event contract with collateral, then creating a set of outcomes. And then based on an oracle's result, you can redeem these outcome tokens for the collateral that was put up initially. The oracles, that's a whole other workshop. But essentially, you've got most notably Augur with their decentralized Oracle mechanism, which is super decentralized, but also super slow. And then on the other hand, you have something like, essentially what we're going to be doing, which is we're going to be acting like as the Oracle, which is very quick, but not decentralized. And really what I'm trying to say here is that at its core, prediction markets are the trading of value-backed agreements about the outcome of an event. It's that simple. And with that definition, we just start looking at what an event is. And then it can span really all sorts of either betting markets, financial derivatives tools, anything you can think of, or any event you can think of, rather. And what do they produce? The outcome of a prediction market is the price of the likeliness of an event happening. And that I think is a pretty neat property compared to perhaps some other markets. So with that overview of prediction markets, let's talk about regulated or being regulated. So who are we regulated with? The Gibraltar Financial Services Commission. They've got a license, the DLT, or Distributed Ledger Technology License. And the interesting thing about this is 2 things. The first thing is that they were pretty early on in terms of providing a license for companies to be licensed. The second thing is it's principles-based. So generally what they say is like you can operate a business that runs on top of blockchain technology. But then they have a list of principles that you have to abide by. For example, KYC and AML has to be done. You need a corporate governance structure. You need a certain amount of money in a company based in Gibraltar. And it's really a way to ensure that the company has to behave well. Otherwise, they stand something significant to lose. And Now, how to be compliant, because as a product manager, this is really where regulation affects the user experience. So where this kind of comes to a head is the onboarding experience. So to do that, you need to get a user's name, email address. You need to get their ID, confirm that ID is authentic, proof of residence. Then you need to provide a wallet address, which needs to go through some form of AML screening, either Chainalysis or Elliptic. And that's not the end of it, because you also need a service that will take that data from either the ID, proof of address, wallet AML, and combine it into a central risk score. And then that risk score needs to be complete or constantly monitored and updated according to the user's activity on the platform. It's a ton of work. And as a product manager, my developers that I work with are primarily smart contract developers. So we've tried to sub out as much of this work as possible. Fractal, if you are a startup and your users have to go through KYC, highly recommend them. They handle the onboarding journey. They have the complete, the UI for it. Yeah, it's just really easy. You turn it on and boom, onboarding taken care of. Then with regards to wallet AML checks, we use Chainalysis at the moment. There's a consensus company called RegCamp, which we are also looking into because they are more focused on ERC20 tokens. And then Passport, which is a company that takes these data sources, combines it into a combined risk score. And essentially, it's just expert rules around compliance management and automates a lot of those tasks. Then we have to create scripts, and that's what I mean by this little diagram over there, to monitor unusual activity, unusual predictions. Yeah, just to make sure that it's not being used for somewhat malicious means. Now, how do we enforce at a smart contract level? Because our event contract is on-chain. Our market contract is also on-chain. So how do we enforce that only, I guess, people who have gone through our compliance process can use it? And it's quite simple. We just have a whitelist that lives in a smart contract. That whitelist will be constantly updated with wallet addresses that have gone through the KYC. Now, no one in the room here is really or maybe someone is involved in either decentralized identity or anything along that nature, right? Yes, one person. Sort of. Okay.
Have you heard of Eigentrust?
No.
Okay, it's so Eigentrust is a paper written in 2006 by it uses the same concepts as PageRank that Google obviously uses for search, but for peer-to-peer identity.
Nice. This is $1 billion opportunity, and it makes complete sense that crypto is involved in solving it. So what I mean by this is we have a whitelist. You can assume that everyone on that whitelist or every wallet address on that whitelist has gone through our KYC. So you could start up your app, reference our whitelist contract, and make a plausible argument that that user has gone through KYC AML. But that's kind of, I mean, then you're relying on essentially one company to do the KYC. Yep.
Like in my business, the FCA doesn't let me do that.
Oh,
the FCA doesn't allow you to rely on someone else's KYC. Every company has to actually do their own KYC, which is kind of a bit of it'd be nice to be able to say, hey, he's passed KYC over there, therefore I can rely on it. But the FCA doesn't let me do that.
So what Gibraltar will let us do is, we are ultimately responsible for making sure that everyone is KYC'd. If the regulator knocks on our door and is like, hey, we need this user's passport information, not even this user's, we need all your users' passport information, ID information, proof of address, and a complete list of transactions. We need to be able to provide that. Not only provide that, but provide that 5 years after the business relationship has ended. So doing this decentralized, you still need to be able to give the company that took a user on, they still need to be able to access that documentation and even perhaps run their own KYC processes on it. I guess what I'm trying to say is we spend a lot of money getting users through KYC. If you have a DApp and you also need to do KYC, you spend a lot of money putting users through KYC. It just makes no sense that this burden cannot be shared and distributed. But that's probably another workshop for another day. I'm highlighting that it's a huge, huge opportunity. So Site. Essentially, it's a prediction market focused on the blockchain industry. And the reason why it's blockchain industry is that's what we know internally. We do have a hope basically to branch out of blockchain, but at the moment, focus on what we know. So the first kind of markets, and what I'm really intrigued about is crypto native markets, i.e. markets that didn't exist before crypto came about. So LedgerX, a really interesting company, they started offering Bitcoin options in like 2013. Now what's really interesting is they are offering options that never existed before. For example, they offer an option on $100,000 Bitcoin in the year 2020. They offer options on when the halving is going to happen for Bitcoin. And I'm really interested in those new type of markets. And then you've got FTX. FTX did a really famous marketing, I guess, activation with the shitcoin index. It's essentially, an index of coins in a low market cap. But the point is, like, that didn't exist before, and these people brought this into life. So on that note, thinking about what are markets that we can make that are specific to cryptocurrency that don't currently exist because either no one's thought about it or just hasn't been possible. So we're very interested in price for obvious reasons, but also kind of blockchain-specific metrics like gas prices, transactions, block difficulty. We're also very interested in deadline. So, I mean, Ethereum 2.0 is on everyone's minds. But even at our own product level, like if we release this feature, what kind of adoption is it going to get? And then speaking of adoption, essentially making predictions on what type of contracts or what type of products are going to get the most amount of adoption or usage. Now, what makes us different from a technical level? I mentioned that Helena was built on the Gnosis contracts, or the version 1. We've created a version 2. I won't deep dive too much into the technical aspect, but essentially the user experience add-on is we can do something called conditional markets. Conditional markets is dependent, so if this condition comes true, then what effect is it going to have on this prediction? We could do that before with our old standard. The problem is every time we mint an outcome, it's an ERC20 token, so the gas costs just get pretty insane. Our new standard uses 1155, which is far more gas efficient. The other interesting thing about it is that it's a monolith. So instead of having a factory contract that produces a new contract for every single market, we append it to a contract. And essentially what we are left with is a single record of questions that people are asking about the future on Ethereum. And I'm super interested to see what this might end up looking like one day, where we almost combine humanity's thought about the future in one central place. And then, permissionless, no fees, anyone can use it. And it also works with any kind of oracle. It essentially just accepts a transaction from a wallet as an oracle response. And then 256 outcomes. So as I mentioned, the old contract standard, every outcome is an ERC20 token, super expensive. You can't really do more than 5 outcomes. We can crank that up to 256 if needed, and that's still a big if. So as I described, at least this kind of if this, then that kind of markets. And this is something we're just really interested in because of its ability to inform decision making, as well as to a degree have risk-free bets. And I'll describe that when I go into the market maker. Oh, that's now. So we are launching with an automated market maker. And the reason for this is it's ideal for low liquidity. Something we've noticed with the order book model is, I mean, let's face it, an order book without activity or liquidity is, it's not a great user experience. So we want to avoid that by having our own market maker. The downside is, it is expensive. We have to fund these markets up front. But the idea is to, if we take liquidity off the table, what kind of markets get traction for our version 1 of this? Now, you'll see here, refund when. So this is a conditional market. And it's basically saying, if the first market resolves to yes, and then for the second market you bet no, you get a payout, 35% of whatever you put in. But if the prior market resolves to no, you get a refund. And this allows us to, essentially where users can have risk-free bets on the prior condition. We're very interested in what kind of essentially prediction behavior this is going to lead to. So non-custodial unregulated, as mentioned in Gibraltar, but why be regulated if we're on blockchain? And the first thing is security. Internally in Gnosis, what we're really good at is building rock-solid smart contracts. And And we feel it's essentially just safer if it's non-custodial. The second thing, and this is important specifically to the industry of, well, all kind of finance really, is that it's transparent. So fully collateralized, no kind of counterparty risk involved. And then because it's all on-chain, you can see that the activity is legitimate. There's obviously been a lot of scandal with wash trading in centralized exchanges, and we want to make it that's impossible on our product. And then interoperability. So our markets will be denominated in DAI, but that's just a start. I mean, all the fun stuff that we've seen happening in the ecosystem, if we want to offer our customers leverage, for example, it's not a case of we have to build our own leverage protocol. We can just integrate with someone else, and that's one of the perks. Why regulated? So here's the thing, is we're not fully decentralized. And the reason why we made that decision is it was really one of UX considerations. For example, the org has got that 16-day resolution date. It's coming down to 3. But we wanted that resolution time is in seconds. So we opted for partly decentralized. And if we are partly decentralized, it means that there is a trusted third party. That's Gnosis. How can we get legitimacy and trust? And for that, we have to put something online, put something at stake. And to that end, that's why we decided to be licensed in Gibraltar, because if we do something that is incorrect or against the customer's best interest, we are liable, and somewhat seriously so. The other angle is we hope that this allows us to access institutional forms of capital, as well as, well, actually, yeah, that's mainly it. So thinking long term, this is a map of what the world's going to look like, well, the temperatures next 40 years. Yeah, spoiler alert, it's getting hot. And what we're really interested in is if people can, before they do something, if they can know what effect that's going to have on other outcomes, what kind of decision making is that going to lead to? And what effect is it going to have on the world overall? But again, that's the super long-term vision. So I think I kind of ran through this, but we are still very early on in our product development stage, and I always love an opportunity to get some user research. So when we talk about prediction markets, really what it is just a question about the future. And I'm interested to hear from you. What is the most pressing question you have about the future of blockchain? Anyone?
Hands up.
Yep.
I'm thinking. Sure. So one of the problems that we actually have regarding that, and also kind of based on the things that you said, KYC is super important. I mean, otherwise you cannot run the company. That's it. But whenever we try to make something in that sense, and we are trying to do it, definitely, it's like the users are like, this is crypto. What are you doing? Do you even want my password when you already have my account? That's everything you need. You know, I mean, a normal user doesn't need a password and a username any nowadays, because you already have the account. So whenever we try to do something like that, it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. So it's sometimes super hard to get users and do the KYC at the same time.
Okay, so if we think about that in terms of this, the pressing question you have about the future of blockchain, it seems to me that will users accept, I guess, having their identity known by a third party? Is it as simple as that?
Yeah. At least the crypto users, at least the users that we can go for now.
Yeah. So we can create a prediction market around that. And I think we would phrase it something along the lines of, so our beta, we're looking for 200 users. And this in itself is our first challenge, our first test. Can we get 200 people to go through a pretty rigorous KYC process? And then specifically, what kind of audiences are there? So yes, users do have that. But I have noticed that retail traders, so people who are used to trading, say, on Kraken or Coinbase, they have no problem whatsoever, especially if the opportunity to make money is there. They will go through it. But generally speaking, I think we all have a pressing question about how regulation is going to affect the future of blockchain. And we have actually spoken to the regulator about offering these kind of markets and got a hard no. So actually, I can't offer those just this yet, but we'll keep on working on it. And then what are the most impactful consequences blockchain can have in 1 year's time? I'm curious to hear from you if you have something in mind, something, some consequence, a tangible metric perhaps, that will say like, hey, blockchain's arrived. Yep.
Sorry.
I don't know about 1 year, but people talk a lot about, especially recently, the effect that regulation will have on blockchain. Be interesting to see if and when we get to a point where blockchain will influence regulation, or the possibility of that blockchain could potentially unlock in society, how that would change the way we make decisions and make laws. I think that would be very interesting to see.
There's one event that comes to mind when I think about that. So I'm kind of jumping on to the next question. But that's Libra. Will Libra launch? If Libra launches, that's probably going to be one of the most consequential events in the whole of blockchain, because it will pave the way forward for regulation, I believe, because it's just going to be on scale that's unknown of. And again, it's something we can have a prediction market on. Not only will Libra launch in, say, 2020, but if Libra launches in 2020, will we see a rise in licenses being offered in many jurisdictions or multiple jurisdictions? And those are the kind of questions we're trying to, well, not trying to, it's a avenue that we're looking to explore with prediction markets. So what's coming next for Site? So as I mentioned, we've got a beta happening early October. We would like to launch with it. Why should you join? Well, first of all, it's exclusive, limited to 200 people. And really what that's about is we're trying to build this community of people thinking about the future. And we are really unsure at this moment where that is going to end. I mean, it could go to, or I say end, we're unsure of what kind of markets are going to lead to product market fit. So on the one side of things, we have markets that are informational. So what we discussed about regulation, for example. But then there are the trading type markets. So we can offer markets on price. So really interested to see, okay, I didn't go into this, but I think it's really cool, so I'll chat about it briefly. Scalar markets, which is a term that was kind of invented with prediction markets. And scalar market is essentially like a range bet. So if I had to say to you, what is the price of Ethereum going to be? Anywhere between the range of $100 and $300. If you say, I believe it's going to be 256, for example, you would buy a basket of long and short shares that would come up, that if that event had to, if the price had to resolve at that price, you would get the maximum payout possible. And what's interesting about that is the payout function is the same as a strategy in options trading called a vertical spread. So that's kind of interesting that we had this thing called scalar markets that we thought was really unique. But actually, no, it's just a very simple way to access a vertical trading strategy, which is fantastic for markets that have highly volatile price movements. The second thing is these conditional markets I mentioned, this if this, then that. We also thought that was really special and unique. But turns out, no, it's not. That's also been known in options trading for forever. It's called a compound option, which is an option on an option. The problem is that it's super confusing. There's no interface because no one really sells it online. You have to go to a bank and negotiate with the banker for an over-the-counter trade. So that is one area that might be really exciting from the kind of the financial prediction markets. But then there's also the informational type markets. So we'll be working with you to explore what are the markets that make the most amount of sense to you and perhaps other demographics that we have in our beta program. Okay, these markets will be funded with 1,000 DAI each, which doesn't sound too much, but bearing in mind that these markets aren't going to be distributed to the whole 200 people on the list, just small cohorts. So there's a chance to make a good sum of cash. And why that is because the odds start out at 50-50, which means if you're the first person to access the market, and let's say it's something like, just I don't want to use the Carrie Lam example. I've kind of overdone that. But let's say it's on Ethereum 2.0 launching. When that, and let's say optimistic, January 2020, you can take that 50-50 starting odds and buy basically a no to move that odds in something that you feel is more realistic. And likely you'll get a big chunk of that DAI initial funding. Yeah, so that's a beta process, that's site, that's why you should join up and why we'd love to have you on board. I've talked a lot. Any questions? Yep.
Yeah, so two brief questions. I guess starting out, you're creating the prediction markets themselves. So have you got do you have on your roadmap kind of user-generated markets? And why did the regulators not allow you to do anything broader than this kind of like blockchain stuff?
Okay, first question, user-generated or user-created markets. So what we've seen, I think Augur and Veil is a great example of this, in that if you allow people to go buck wild with markets, you end up diluting the liquidity on your platform because there's just more stuff to potentially put your money into. Also in the Web 2.0, the most successful prediction markets we've seen, so for example, Predicted, they're very focused in the markets that they offer, political-based markets. So it means they attract the right crowd, that crowd brings money. They are not diluting the focus of the audience on their platform. However, I do think it is interesting because there's a very simple game, right, that we're playing. And that's essentially, what does it cost to set up a market in terms of providing initial liquidity? And then what does it generate or fees? By the way, that's our business model. We're making fees. And so we think we're pretty good at that game. But I say that, we haven't actually really tried, so I don't know. Hopefully, we'll figure it out. But can we decentralize that game in the sense of allowing anyone to propose a market? And if that market's, the fees generated off that market, a percentage goes back to the initial creator. So there's definitely an opportunity for it, but I would say I would like to try find product market fit first before exploring the options. Your second question, which is why the regulator kind of stipulated a fairly narrow, I guess, range of markets. And for them, it really comes down to risk, right? So, okay, I can say one thing, is that they basically said, yeah, you can do this. Don't touch gaming or gambling. No. That was a whole other department, and would require a whole other licensing thing. But then why specifically focus on crypto and within blockchain, and why kind of we could have a fairly broad look in that market is essentially, yeah, it's for them, they're taking on a risk because no one's ever licensed a prediction market before, really, unless it becomes something else like a legitimate futures market. So they were like, listen, in order to reduce the risk, we want you guys to basically focus on what you do best. But it's not a hard, for life. It's, I think, something that we would like to expand, but post product market fit or post traction with these initial markets.
Just on the regulation again, are you talked about, it was how it was good to be regulated, trust and stuff like that, but are you getting regulated because you want to or because you think you have to?
That's a good question. Yeah, if I didn't have to, would I do? You know what, it's somewhere...
I mean, do you think if you set this up tomorrow, Gnosis, you're based in Germany or something, are you? So I'm not sure where it's based or something. Yeah. If you set this up tomorrow, would you have, someone kicking in your door and arresting people? Is that why you're getting regulated, or is it because you see some commercial advantage to being regulated?
So, I mean, the commercial thing, we do see an advantage, but that is a theory at this point of view. We really have to investigate that further and play it out. I think what Gnosis learned from the ICO was that if you do something un-KYC'd, it's very difficult then to work in, I guess, regular structures. So taking that learning on, I was like, well, if we want to start accessing more institutional structures of capital, become more legitimate, let's do this properly from the get-go. Yeah, so it's more looking at, I guess, really certainty around operating a company. That's the main reason, and we wanted as much.
And so, I'm assuming like something like Augur then would be, you would see that as the more kind of decentralized, wild,
it's
crazy
definitely
side of the market.
Yeah. When you launch with assassination markets, that's the Wild West.
No, that's what I mean. So that's you see that as so you're differentiating yourself from that in terms of a commercial offering. You're obviously not going to offer, assassination markets.
No, I mean not. And I mean maybe. Wait, you're not recording that, are you? No plan for assassination markets. I mean, here is something interesting: is that because we are Oracle agnostic at the moment, we are the Oracle, but the data sources can be from multiple data sources, and there's nothing stopping us from using the Augur Oracle as an Oracle. That again is probably a whole other workshop, because then you get into something called like parasitical prediction markets, where you don't pay the fees for the Oracle, but you still use that Oracle data to resolve your market. Kind of rambled there. I think, yes, to put it, we are taking the regulated approach, whereas Augur is still very much, because of its decentralized nature, very much, I guess, the Wild West somewhat. Yeah.
And sorry, just very quickly, just on the market making, I mean, what's the capacity on that in terms, just generally? I mean, how does that scale? I mean, 'cause from the looks of it,
it doesn't.
Sorry?
It doesn't. To cut you off somewhat. So the first market maker, works great with low liquidity. The scaling is limited by the amount of the initial funds we put into it. So what do I mean by that? If I fund the market maker with one DAI, and then you go into a market and you want to buy a prediction, so say, yes, this event is going to occur, and you put down one DAI, you move the odds from then 50-50 all the way to like 99. So it loses its predictive, I guess, granularity. So you have to fund it with more money, so it gets more granular, and it also requires more money to move it.
Have you thought about what Betfair did, and they actually had market makers in their exchange at the start, and they incentivized them to make markets?
So here's the thing about market makers. In order to do that, we would have to build an order book. To build an order book with our contract stack, it's about, we predicted 6 months. I would quite happily say probably 8 months to 9 months to get that out. And that's why we're going with the LSMR market maker at launch, because we don't want to wait 9 months to build an order book. But then the great thing about an order book is, you can work with market makers. The catch about working with market makers is you have to work with markets that they are familiar with, or have similar markets outside of your platform that you can hedge against. So if I was going to offer a prediction market around the price of Ethereum, no problem. Market makers know how to take that on, because they can hedge against on different exchanges and whatnot. If I'm going to offer a market on somewhat obscure events, or maybe an event with no kind of historical prior precedent, then it becomes way more difficult for them to model the risk around that. So working with market makers, long story short, kind of limits you to markets that have precedent in other exchanges. So definitely thought about it, and definitely if we start seeing more traction around these financially orientated markets, then that's the way to go to get other market makers on board.
Kind of related to the last point, don't you think that there'll be less adoption if you're making events based on events in the blockchain instead of events that everyone knows about?
True, but here's the a hypothesis really, because I don't want to say it's the truth until we've really investigated further. But our product has constraints, and those constraints are you need a Web3 wallet, you need Ethereum, and you need DAI. Now, the amount of people that have those three things, it's a really small pool. It'd be interesting to get people's predictions, but I would say 20,000. Maybe the gentleman from Dapper Radar, perhaps you'd have a better.
Well, for game we would say about 40,000, but that's not necessarily, that's a different market.
Okay, 40. Let's round it up to 50,000 people. Now, those 50,000 people, I can be fairly sure that they are interested in blockchain-related subjects. I'm not sure how many of them are going to be interested in, say, the US presidential election or some other event. So that's essentially the bet we're making, is that people who hold cryptocurrency, who are knowledgeable enough to have a Web3 wallet, and knowledgeable enough to have DAI, are willing to, or are interested in partaking in markets specifically around those topics.
Are you willing to, or are you planning to make it easier to access then for a wider market?
Sure. So I think we have to be really careful here. So Veil, one of the companies I mentioned that was sunsetted, one of the reasons that they gave is that they didn't do a good job onboarding non-crypto users. Onboarding non-crypto users is one hell of a job. It's difficult, it's expensive, and I don't think that's something that one company or one product can do. It's something that's going to grow as the ecosystem grows. So I think the idea is to see where the ecosystem goes and grow with it and those kind of markets. I think the people who are going to be responsible for getting, well, onboarding is really going to be the centralized exchanges like Coinbase and Kraken and so on. But we're not targeting people who don't know anything about crypto because it's just a bridge too far in terms of onboarding them. Cool. Cool. If we have one last thing, I'm curious. This is a question I ask often in kind of UX research, but if you could have a market on anything you wanted, I'm curious, does anyone have any suggestions or any ideas of what it would be and why? Bearing in mind, a market doesn't necessarily have to be something that's traded with a lot of people. It could just be a market for yourself. Sorry, Mike.
Hi, my name is Tamim. I'm a researcher out of University College London. Hey. Something I'm kind of looking at the moment is, can you have prediction sort of markets for policy making?
Yep.
That's so intertwined in the economy, but it's very difficult to measure. But you have people from the private and public sector all hedging against each other on their policies, and there's a whole huge market on that. That's probably...
So are you familiar with Robin Hanson's work in Futarchy and that concept? Okay, so there's a whole line of academic research around this notion that markets can make better decisions than policymakers. And the reason for that is if you're going to back a decision by money, it's very difficult to basically bullshit it. Whereas you can publicly say a bunch of stuff and campaign for something, but if it doesn't affect your wallet at the end of the day, it doesn't come with a whole lot of risk. So, skin in the game. And that's what we are kind of interested with these kind of markets. So these if this, then that. So, if X policy goes through, then what effect is it going to have on some metric that policy is designed to affect? Interesting enough, I'm sure you're all familiar with a company called Aragon. They do DAOs. So they're working on a Futarchy app that does exactly that. They've got this AGM process whereby their funding is based on people voting on certain policies. And they're going to have a market that says, like, cool, if this policy goes through, then what effect is it going to have on the ANT token, I believe that's what's called. So yeah, that's a hot topic in crypto governance right now. Yep.
So wouldn't, like, for example, if using politics as an example, wouldn't it be interesting, I mean, it would have been interesting recently, but just in generally, to be, and particularly now that the Parliament is kind of becoming quite fractured, I mean, every single vote that they do could be a market, right? So every single vote that Parliament has on either large things or even kind of, stages of bills or whatever like that. Couldn't you set that up as a market and then effectively, that would also have both financial interest, particularly, hey, if particular bill or legislation affected me financially, I might be able to hedge against that, but also informational interest in that, hey, look, what are the markets, what are the markets saying about, either the next reading of this bill or whether it will pass in general?
Yeah, I mean,
because I know Betfair has more generalised market results, but they don't necessarily have that granular, like, all right, what's this vote going to be on maybe this this legislation or this kind of stuff.
At the end of the day, it comes down to money. So if those granular markets can't attract enough interest to get the trading, they won't offer them. There is something that we investigated, but frankly, it's the people that we've initially spoken to, the business model doesn't seem to resonate. And that's basically getting people to fund markets. We take a fee for then creating that market and putting it out there. But if you ask someone like, hey, are you willing to fund a prediction market on XYZ topic? It's not all that positive. So we're not actively pursuing that business model as of yet, but definitely keeping our eyes open. Unless you would like to fund the prediction market.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay, let's chat.
That was kind of what Argo's model, isn't it? That you stake your rep.
You stake your rep, yes, but you stake your rep. You do have to fund it with liquidity, but not really. And then you still have this like order book that if it doesn't attract enough trading, it's very difficult to make a trade. Whereas with an automated market maker, you can come along at any time and make a trade. And that's the big difference in terms of the user experience. In principle, it's kind of the same, because you create a market and you fund it with liquidity, and then you get a chunk of the fees. In practice, though, a order book, somewhat difficult. If you don't have market makers on board, you can't offer the user the
I mean, I think it's the balance between, as you say, for the thing to work, you have to have, interesting but not too interesting markets that are going to attract a lot of liquidity with people who think they've got an edge on what's going on. But I think you do lose something as someone who has used Augur and tried to use Veil. I thought Veil was interesting in the sense that you had that ability to, it seemed to be a bit more user generated. But then the cost would, for me, kind of, for someone just messing around with it, were too expensive. I can't remember when I looked at it how much it was.
It was cost in what terms?
I think you needed rep to create the
markets.
Yeah. And it's actually quite hard. I didn't spend a lot of time. I spent a bit of time thinking, how could I come up with a more interesting question than what's the price of Ether or what's Donald Trump going to do? And it is actually quite difficult because you kind of think about memes and things that are going to attract interest and be a bit of a fun thing. But I found it very difficult to actually come up with something that
something I've been intrigued about, especially when looking at DeFi Pulse and DApp Radar, is predicting the success of certain products. Well, as a product manager, that's what I'm interested in.
It's kind of interesting. So we've got this bet going on between Jimmy Sun and Joe Lubin about DApp usage, which is I thought would be an obvious thing for some prediction market to have. And as far as I can see, no one's done that yet. And obviously, then you've kind of they're betting whatever they're betting, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But it would be nice to have that'd be you think the ideal thing because it's in the blockchain space. And people will be interested. People, the Bitcoin maximalist will have one view, and the ETH max.
So that's a strategy we've been investigating of essentially how do we insert ourselves in the middle of a debate, and then really try to bring rationality to the debate by asking people to essentially put their money where their mouth is. It's that simple. There's a few other applications in the space trying to do that. Mainly something called True Story, which basically people have to stake money against a claim, I don't want to get sued by Justin Sun, so I won't mention anything more. Cool. Any other questions? Yep.
So how many markets are you initially intending to kind of have in your beta?
Good question.
And what are your fees that you are charging per market?
Cool. So for beta, 0. What kind of markets and how many markets, that's really unknown at this stage. So we've got a few markets that we've thought of in different categories, mainly price, infrastructure, deadlines, and then blockchain metrics, so gas, transaction fees. And then also somewhat adoption markets, so how much money is going to be locked up in Maker, for example. But we are going to be somewhat flexible on that in the sense of I don't think it's possible to think of all the possible markets as of now, but I would like to run it on a cadence of like one a week. But that brings up a whole interesting question about this, which is timelines. So do you make a market that expires in 1 week, which is like super exciting, you get the action, it resolves, or do you make the markets that resolve in 6 months to a year, and perhaps you make a prediction, you forget about it, and then you find out in a year's time like something happened. That's also something we need to figure out, and I'm not quite sure what the right answer is. Certainly, trading activity stems towards shorter time spans, shorter resolution spans, but perhaps the real interesting questions are far more long-term, ETH 2.0 launching. So we haven't figured that out either. Success for me would look like that if we created an index somewhat of like the Ethereum or the predicted Ethereum adoption index, which would be one number to predict the likeliness of Ethereum's adoption, or even ETH 2.0 success index, so predicting the amount of Ethereum that's going to be staked in ETH 2.0, for example. I'm rambling somewhat, but to answer your question, many markets, or as many as that makes sense.
And fees outside of beta?
Fees outside the beta, also a good question. So the number that we've thrown around is 1%. And that's really to try cover the costs of providing that initial liquidity on the market. But but super flexible on that. I mean, and I don't think it's certainly not set in stone. As well as, yeah, we think that fees might be one key to the business model and making it, but perhaps not. Perhaps it might mean something whereby we source funding from other partners. So again, fees would have to make sense. Also makes sense in terms of competition. So what fees are successful Augur markets offering, and then thinking outside of that, what are the fees that are being offered by the likes of Kraken, Coinbase, etc. Yeah. Oh, and also how expensive is the Oracle? So if the Oracle data is super expensive, or if the Oracle incurs a lot of risk, then that will also have effect on fees. Cool, guys, I think we've overrun somewhat. But yeah, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, just chat.